A Redditor shared a chilling late-night encounter while walking home, their heart already uneasy from the eerie silence of the empty streets. As they turned a corner, their breath hitched. A man stood motionless under a flickering streetlight, his face frozen in an unnaturally wide smile that sent a shiver down their spine. The smile wasn't warm or friendly. It was grotesque, almost inhuman, stretching far too wide to be real. As the Redditor cautiously passed by, their pulse quickened. The man's head slowly turned, his unblinking eyes locking onto theirs, and he began to follow. Each step he took was deliberate, his grin never faltering, his gaze never wavering. Panic surged through the Redditor as they quickened their pace, but the man matched their speed effortlessly, his movements unervingly smooth. Terror gripped them as they broke into a run, their breath coming in ragged gasps. But then, they heard it, the sound of footsteps behind them, light and rhythmic. Glancing back, their blood ran cold. The man was skipping after them, his arms swinging carelessly, that same horrifying smile plastered across his face. The Redditor's legs burned as they sprinted, their minds screaming for safety. When they finally dared to look back again, the man was gone, vanished into the shadows as if he had never been there. But the image of that smile, wide, unnatural, and utterly wrong, was seared into their memory. They stood there, trembling, their heart pounding in their chest, unable to shake the feeling that whatever they had encountered wasn't entirely human. The night felt darker now, the silence heavier. And as they hurried home, one question echoed in their mind. What had they just witnessed? In the depths of the Soviet Union during the 1940s, at the height of Stalin's regime, a secret experiment was conducted deep within the walls of a remote research facility. The goal was simple yet horrifying: to test the limits of human endurance by depriving 5 political prisoners of sleep for 15 days. The scientists wanted to see how long a person could stay awake before their mind and body collapsed. What they didn't anticipate was the descent into madness that would follow. A madness so profound it would haunt everyone involved. The subjects were 5 men, all political dissidents who had been arrested for speaking out against the government. They were told they would be pardoned if they participated in the experiment. Desperate for freedom, they agreed. The scientists sealed them in a small, airtight chamber filled with a specially formulated gas that would keep them awake. Microphones and cameras were installed to monitor their every move, and food and water were provided through a small slot in the door. The first few days at first, the men were calm. They talked amongst themselves, played cards, and even joked about their situation. The scientists observed them closely, taking notes on their behavior. But by the 3rd day, things began to change. The men grew irritable, snapping at each other over trivial matters. Their conversations became disjointed, and they started to exhibit signs of paranoia. One of the subjects, a man named Ivan, began to whisper to himself, his eyes darting around the room as if he were being watched. Another, named Alexei, started scratching at the walls, claiming he could hear voices coming from the other side. The scientists dismissed these behaviors as typical side effects of sleep deprivation and continued the experiment. The descent into madness. By the 5th day, the men's mental states had deteriorated significantly. They stopped talking to each other entirely, instead muttering incoherently to themselves. Ivan began to scream at the walls, accusing the scientists of planting spies among them. Alexei tore at his own skin, leaving bloody scratches on his arms and face. The other 3 men sat in silence, their eyes wide and unblinking, staring at nothing. The scientists grew concerned but decided to press on. They increased the concentration of the gas, hoping to push the subjects to their limits. By the 7th day, the chamber was a scene of utter chaos. The men were no longer recognizable as human. They had torn their clothes to shreds and smeared their own feces on the walls. Ivan had gouged out one of his eyes, claiming it was watching him. Alexei had bitten off his own fingers, chewing them like a rabid animal. The breaking point in the 10th day, the scientists made a horrifying discovery. The men had stopped eating and drinking entirely. Instead, they had begun to cannibalize each other. One of the subjects, a man named Dmitri, was found dead in a corner of the chamber, his throat torn out. The others were huddled around his body, their faces smeared with blood. When the scientists tried to intervene, the men attacked the door, screaming in a language that sounded like nothing human. The scientists were terrified but fascinated. They decided to continue the experiment, believing they were on the verge of a groundbreaking discovery. By the 13th day, only 2 men remained alive, Ivan and Alexei. They had become something else entirely monstrous, inhuman creatures with hollow eyes and twisted smiles. They no longer slept, ate, or drank. They simply existed, their bodies emaciated and their minds shattered. The final hours on the 15th day, the scientists finally decided to end the experiment. They opened the chamber and were immediately met with a scene of unimaginable horror. Ivan and Alexei were crouched in the center of the room, their bodies twisted and broken. They were whispering to each other in that same, incomprehensible language, their voices low and guttural. When the scientists tried to remove them, the men attacked with inhuman strength. Ivan lunged at one of the researchers, biting into his neck and tearing out his throat. Alexei grabbed another scientist by the arm, snapping it like a twig before slamming his head into the wall. The remaining researchers managed to subdue the men with tranquilizers, but the damage was done. The aftermath, the surviving scientists were left traumatized by what they had witnessed. Ivan and Alexei were taken to a secure facility where they were kept under constant surveillance. They never slept, never ate, and never spoke again. They simply sat in their cells, staring at the walls with those same hollow eyes. The lead scientist, Dr. Mikhailov, was found dead in his office a week later. His suicide note read, "We opened a door that should have remained closed. What we saw cannot be unseen. What we unleashed cannot be contained." The experiment was buried, its records destroyed, and the facility abandoned. But rumors persisted, whispered among those who dared to speak of it. Some say Ivan and Alexei are still alive, locked away in some forgotten corner of the world. Others claim the experiment was never truly shut down, that it continues to this day, hidden from the public eye. It was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway. Just a group of friends camping in the woods, roasting marshmallows, and telling stories around the fire. We were all so excited, laughing and joking as we packed our gear. I remember Sarah teasing Mark about his overpacked backpack, and Mark firing back with his usual sarcastically. We were carefree, invincible, and ready for adventure. But what started as a peaceful trip quickly turned into a nightmare none of us would ever forget. We had chosen a remote spot deep in the forest, far from any towns or roads. The area was known for its dense trees, winding trails, and eerie silence. Some locals had warned us about strange occurrences in those woods. Disappearances, strange noises, and sightings of something that wasn't quite human. But we brushed it off as superstition. We were young, reckless, and convinced that nothing could touch us. Looking back, I wish we had listened. The first night was uneventful. We set up camp, cooked dinner, and spent hours laughing and sharing stories. The fire crackled warmly, casting flickering shadows on our faces. I remember feeling so content, so at peace, surrounded by my closest friends. As the fire died down, we decided to call it a night and retreated to our tents. The forest was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant hoot of an owl. I fell asleep quickly, lulled by the cool night air and the sound of my friends' soft breathing. But around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a voice, familiar yet distorted, calling my name from somewhere in the darkness. My heart skipped a beat, and I sat up, clutching my sleeping bag. The voice came again, louder this time. It sounded like my friend, Mark, but there was something off about it. The tone was too high-pitched, almost mocking. A chill ran down my spine, and I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. The mimic eye crawled out of my tent, flashlight in hand, my hands trembling so badly I could barely grip it. "Mark!" I called out, my voice shaking. The voice responded immediately, pleading for help. It was coming from the trees, just beyond the edge of our campsite. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to stay put. But the thought of Mark in trouble overrode my fear. I grabbed a knife and stepped into the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest as I moved deeper into the woods. The voice grew louder, more desperate, but something about it felt wrong. The words were slurred, the tone unnatural. My breath came in short, panicked bursts, and I could feel sweat dripping down my back despite the cold night air. I called out again, and this time my voice changed. It was no longer Mark's voice, it was mine. It was as if the forest itself was mimicking me, repeating my words back to me in a twisted, guttural tone. I froze, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The voice stopped, and for a moment, there was silence. Then I heard it, a low, guttural laugh that sent chills down my spine. It was coming from behind me. My stomach dropped, and I felt a wave of pure, unadulterated terror. Stopped abruptly, and for a moment, there was silence. The attack, that's when we saw it. The creature emerged from the trees, its grotesque form illuminated by the moonlight. It walked on two legs, its body covered in matted fur, its eyes glowing like embers. Its face was a twisted parody of a human's, with a wide, toothy grin that stretched from ear to ear. It tilted its head, studying us with an almost playful curiosity. Sarah screamed, a raw, primal sound that echoed through the night. The creature lunged, moving with unnatural speed. I swung my knife, but it was like trying to fight a shadow. The creature darted in and out of the darkness, its laughter echoing around us. I could hear Mark shouting, his voice filled with panic, and Sarah sobbing as she clutched her bleeding arm. We fought with everything we had, but it was like trying to hold back a storm. The creature was everywhere and nowhere, its glowing eyes always just out of reach. I felt a surge of desperation, a burning need to protect my friends, but I was powerless. The creature was toying with us, and we all knew it. The escape at first light, we packed up our camp and fled the woods. We didn't speak much on the way back, each of us lost in our own thoughts. Sarah sat in the back seat, clutching her injured arm, her face pale and drawn. Mark stared out the window, his jaw clenched, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. I sat in silence, my mind replaying the night's events over and over. When we finally reached the safety of the car, we made a pact never to speak of what happened. But the memory of that night has stayed with me, haunting my dreams. I still hear the laughter, still see those glowing eyes staring at me from the shadows. I've since learned that the creature we encountered